Everybody would be... that's a kind of nice way to say shut up. I'm trying to be nice to you, so we'll try and make a start. I'm just looking, and now the quality of delegate in this room is now higher than the quality of delegate at the conference, so I think we can start. I think we can all agree that, yeah? Everybody happy to agree that? If you don't understand me because of my Scottish accent, we'll just bugger off, basically. I'll do my best, but, you know. Right, for those of you, just to make sure you're in the right place, this is on the future of work. And record employment has been accompanied by record high self-employment, but has rise of the gig economy given people the freedom and flexibility they need in today's fast-paced world, or has it created a new class of workers destined for insecurity? Now, we have a very good panel here to discuss this. We've got Mike Amesbury, who's the courageous MP who's going to go first. He picked to go first, so he's being courageous. And you all know Mike as Shadow Minister for Employment and used to be a careers advisor and a former manager of Connection Service. So he might actually know something about what he's talking about, which would be fantastic. Yeah. Going second is Hugh Milward from Microsoft. Microsoft are sponsoring this, and I've said to him that I will give Microsoft a plug in return for free software. So if anyone wants a free software, see them afterwards. He leads the corporate external and legal affairs function at Microsoft, and also responsible for the corporate responsibility programme. So anybody from local councils, get your bid in afterwards and see if you can get any cash off him. You know, it's always worth doing. And then third, the person who wants to go third is the wimpy economist. Vicky Price is the chief economic advisor and a board member for the Centre for Economics and Business Research, and she's got a whole host of things that she's done, which I'm not going to bore you with because I guess we want to talk about the issues. I think this is an issue that is absolutely enormous, and we do not do enough talking about it. Yes, we're going to talk about the nature of employment and how we deal with issues like, gig economy, where are workers' rights, how do we make sure people are getting... But then also we might stray into fields of what workers, as automation comes in, what workers driving cabs. In my old borough, Newham, where I was mayor for many years, lots of people supplement their income through cab driving. That, with automated cars, that may go. So there's a whole really important wave coming towards us. It's come and it's coming big. And understanding that is critical. And you all know that because that's why you're here, because you're smart enough to understand this is one of the big issues that we have to debate as a movement and as a party. So, enough from me. Let's get on to the experts. And the first speaker is Mike Amesbury, the Shadow Minister for Employment. Mike.
Thank you, and thank you for inviting me to speak today. I'm proud to be the new Shadow Minister of Employment, and as silly as you said there, I was previously a careers advisor and connections manager. I'm not sure I do know what I'm talking about as a result of that, but let's give it a go. I mean, it's a fantastic job to have, but like most portfolios, it includes a long and varied list of responsibilities, from low pay to universal credit, which is quite a biggie at the moment, to the health and safety executive. But today we're covering that small topic of the future of work. So I'm pleased to be speaking at this event today, the future of work, because that's essentially what I see my role as. Making sure that we, as a party, in opposition and in government, respond and shape the future of work that is decent and fulfilling for those who undertake it. And it's safe, and I would argue should be fairly regulated too. That aim has been true of my predecessors in the role for many decades, of course. What is different, challenging and exciting in equal measure about the role today is just how quickly the future world of work is changing and developing on a national and international scale. And consequently, therefore, how we as a party and as a future government adapt to ensure that the citizen, consumers and society benefit, and that benefit is shared fairly and equitably. I've been coming to the Labour Party conference now for 20 years, so I've seen it in its various guises, like yourself. And if you told me way back then, 20-odd years ago, that I'd be quoting a world-famous space and tech billionaire called Elon Musk, who believes that robots pose an existential threat to us, I think I probably looked at you a bit funny. But in 2018, that's a serious question that's being asked. And I would suggest that the evidence suggests not. If you look at a recent report by PwC, for the jobs that are probably going to be created in the next decade in terms of AI and robotics, around 7.2 million in the UK alone. 7 million will be lost, and it may be the taxi drivers that we're talking about there. But it would be key to ensure that have a government that gets on the side of people and intervenes with other partners, trade unions and employers, to ensure we shape and respond to that insecurity in terms of the future. I visited a place called Robert's Bakery in my constituency very recently. It employs 900 people, but certainly robotics has been introduced there on a number of production lines. So while some jobs have been lost, new jobs have been created. Of course, those robots have got to be manufactured, and they're manufactured actually just up the road in my constituency as well, in Weaver Vale. They've got to be serviced, they've got to be maintained, so there are jobs that are created there. So in the case of that, there was probably a loss of around 10 jobs, but there was 3 additional jobs that were created, and that's a kind of a micro example, really. So I don't think we're seeing an existential threat to work, but what we're seeing is a rapid and irreversible change in how and where we work. This means skills and knowledge are going to be increasing the focus, and in many cases bringing a divide between cities and towns, and a rise in insecurity and instability, actually for most of us, but with most of that actually falling on the shoulders probably of those that are lowest paid in lowest skilled occupations. Increasingly, too, the economic benefits of this approach are being felt by those probably at the top, while those at the bottom are falling further behind. So underneath the many consumer benefits realised by the new ways of working is a story of low pay and unfulfilling work, with practices that may be undertaken in a shiny computerised warehouse, but they're a little indifferent to what we've had probably 150 years ago. The relationships, of course, between employer and employee will change as we know it too. It's rapidly changing now. We've seen a huge rise in self-employment, and for many that might bring freedoms and flexibility, but for far too many it brings instability and insecurity too, and especially jobs that may be classed as self-employment, but in reality are anything but. It's also come at a cost of the withdrawal of terms and conditions and rights that have been enjoyed and secured by many working people over the previous century. And the way to respond to this, I would argue, is to rebalance the relationship between capital and labour in our economy. It may sound like the language of the first industrial revolution, but it remains as true today as it did then. And it has always been a competition between those two sides. And the Labour Party and trade unions have been the referee on the pitch, ensuring that rules are developed and followed, whether it be the Agricultural Wages Act of the first Labour government or the Minimum Wage Acts and the right to paid holiday and paternity leave of the most recent Labour governments as examples. So the new economy, however, means that the nature of the game and the rules of the game have changed than from before. So we need to put that referee, I would argue, back on the pitch to rebalance, or swing that pendulum back towards employees. But in an age when trade union membership is less than 25% of the workforce and only 13% in the private sector are organised by trade unions, we need to work with the unions to support them in new forms of organising, to make sure they can continue to play their vital role towards fairness, wage growth, economic growth. The fragmented nature of the gig economy means that the old organising models in defined factories or workplaces cover fewer and fewer workers. Our recent manifesto committed to sectorial level bargaining to help unions drive up wages and conditions. And many are testing new organising models like the TUC's Young Workers Act-based approach called Work Smart. We're also seeing legal victories. People have referred to Uber already. So again, strengthening the terms and conditions in that particular new model of working. Certainly, this rebalancing won't happen if left to the current government. Much of what was hoped for from the Taylor Review, which recognised the one-sided nature of flexibility in the gig economy, has not been effectively addressed. Its answers were sadly unambitious, however, and it's no surprise it's been kicked now seemingly into the long grass. So if this government won't act, what would a Labour government do? We'd focus, as said before, on improving bargaining coverage, as mentioned, but we'd also focus on pay with a real living national wage and encourage employers to aim for the ceiling rather than the floor. We would take steps to ensure that self-employment is genuine self-employment, but where it's used as a cover for poor practice or to avoid offering fair terms and conditions, we'll legislate, we'll give teeth. We will offer in-work protections from day one. Workers deserve holiday and paternity rights, regardless of how long they've been in a job, and we'll ensure that they get it. And we'll also give workers a genuine stake in companies, which John McDonnell outlined only on Monday. As my good colleague Rebecca Long-Bailey said very recently, look, if it looks like a job and it smells like a job, then it is a job. So we need to ensure that's enshrined in practice. Importantly too, we'd amend the system for those out of work to provide support, reskilling and guidance right throughout life, and a pilot maybe on universal basic income. Maybe that would be as revolutionary today as we had as the NHS way back in 1948. The world of work, of course, is rapidly changing more than ever before, and it requires some flexible approaches to that. 2/3 of our 2030 workforce are already in employment. So it isn't a challenge that can be solved early years or in school or in colleges. It's got to be right throughout life. The TUC, for example, have called for a guarantee of a midlife career review for every worker. And I think it's important that we look closely and carefully at this positive suggestion, because people will change careers several times throughout their lifetimes. We've got to create a system where we have active welfare and we create opportunity and support. Legislating to give people a fairer share of rewards and rights that keep them safe in the workplace while also allowing a balance between work, home and family life. The economy may be new, changing and rapidly transforming, but our challenge hasn't, and our aims certainly haven't. We need new tools to meet these aims, but the history of our party, the Labour Party, and our movement says we can do it. Thank you.
Thanks, mate. Right, Hugh.
Yes, good morning, everyone. So the gig economy is one market response to the rise of new working opportunities or new working models. But there are other new industries and opportunities that the development of technology will also offer, in addition to the gig economy. And if we're designing interventions that address the challenges presented by the gig economy, then it's also prudent to look at the other changes in work that are taking place and the working practices that will arise as a result of that. The development of AI is probably the most notable of that, and you've already referenced driverless cars, although frankly I don't feel ready to get in a car without a steering wheel quite yet. But AI is definitely the most notable. The data analytical capabilities of deep neural networks and other kinds of advanced machine learning will be very good at doing some jobs currently undertaken by humans. For instance, AI is now better than humans at visual recognition, at speech, at translation, and at reading, better than humans. But it's very difficult to find AI that is good at all of those things. We're a long way from general artificial intelligence that will actually replace people who perform a range of tasks and need to exercise any form of judgment. Instead, we can expect a number of quite well-defined tasks to be able to be automated and therefore replaced. Inevitably, this will affect jobs. Translators, call centers, paralegals, radiologists, a lot of the functions that sit within those roles can be replaced by AI. And these kind of new jobs will actually be, new roles will emerge, just as they already are emerging. But what will be required in order to see the gains from AI will be a greater level of deconstruction of work, increasing understanding of different tasks and what's required to undertake those tasks within particular functions, and what can be automated and what can't be automated. So turning to the gig economy specifically, those workers who want levels of flexibility and freedom that the gig economy offers find the work preferable to traditional work. They find the ability to work where and when they want, even serving markets in completely different time zones to deliver micro-working. And in some respects, it's the definition of modern outcome-oriented rather than input-oriented working. The future of the economy doesn't have to have offices, a 9-to-5 culture. It doesn't require ties or uniforms and water cooler moments. The kind of coffee shop economy can be deeply appealing to some sections of society. For companies too, the ability to tap into a totally different mindset, to enfranchise people who have a lot to offer but require a lot of flexibility. I'm thinking full-time parents, students, people who have restricted mobility or mental health issues but who want to participate in the economy. It can be transformative for the fortunes of them and for business as well. But for those who enter the gig economy involuntarily, it can be disempowering and insecure, with workers feeling that they hold none of the cards and none of the employment rights seen by traditional employees around sickness or holidays that are afforded to traditional employees. So there needs to be some action to protect those workers, and we're recommending 5 actions. The first is that young people in education need to have access to proper computer science and ICT training, but also training and support for those skills that are uniquely human, such as creativity, analytical skills, and empathy. The second is continuous access to development and training for existing workers, so people who are already in the workforce, particularly in industries that can be more affected by technology developments. So the third is the provision of much greater legal certainty about the employment status of gig economy workers and flexible working, who currently fall somewhere between being employed and being self-employed, and so that there is clarity for them around their rights and their obligations, including tax, for example. The fourth is the development of industry best practices around gig economy workers. After all, gig economy workers can vote with their feet, and companies need to behave, those companies that do behave the best will attract the best in gig economy workers. So the rights that of the companies and the responsibility of companies is incredibly important. And the fifth is that benefits move with the worker in a modernized social security network, or net. The traditional notions of employment rights need to be redesigned to apply to workers rather than to employees. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you. Right, and now Vicky.
Thank you very much. I mean, such a huge topic, AI and what it's going to do to work and growth and productivity and so on. I mean, the interesting thing is that so far, the application of technology doesn't seem to have increased productivity. Certainly, if you look at this country, it's quite interesting because every technical revolution we've seen before has had a huge impact on growth capability. So far, it seems that a lot of the gains of IT and AI have gone to companies themselves rather than to the worker, and that's quite a change from before. Maybe it just takes time, and maybe we'll get there eventually. But it's also very interesting that quite a lot of the work that's been created for people on the gig economy, as we call it, is based on apps and technology. But it has created a lot of work because of those apps, and that is because it gives a service to people. So there is clearly a demand, and there's been an increase in terms of the number of workers in the last couple of years in the UK that who are working on what we can define now as the gig economy of some 22%. So there is a big increase in demand for the people to do the things that the apps allow you to do in terms of the way in which you procure a service, such as the Uber cars. That's the second quite interesting thing, that so far this application has increased jobs rather than reduce them, which is good. So the third thing is that a lot of the skills that are required in this gig economy, actually, although of course in the future lots of accountants may not be needed any longer, which would be a huge sigh of relief and so on, it has tended to create jobs in lower skilled areas where you provide the service, including care. So you know when you're going to be arriving for your next patient, where the demand might be, and all sorts of ideas of how to improve even that. But it has been generally in the low-skilled areas. And that has quite an interesting consequence, which is that the gig economy workers generally do not get paid that much per hour. And what it does, unfortunately, because this is one of the ways in which you measure productivity in the economy, it has tended to reduce the productivity growth rather than increase it. So you've had all these perverse sort of consequences of this, which you wouldn't have expected if you were writing a textbook on how AI and apps were going to be influencing our economy. So it is a bit of a puzzle, but actually it explains a lot of the productivity puzzle, the thing that we were all worried about. And of course, if you have all these cheap people to employ, investing in an app isn't that expensive, I suppose. But you can expand the number of people you use to meet that demand, rather than perhaps invest in other ways. So investment in the economy has basically, business investment, been very, very low. And the fourth or fifth puzzle, when you look at this, is that despite the fact that all these people are so cheap and they are prepared to work very often at less than minimum wage. I mean, the interesting thing is that that there was a report only yesterday, which I actually commented on the radio, which found that there are about 250,000 people, if not more in some calculations. It could have been 330, but 250 if you exclude the other benefits that they get, who are paid below the minimum wage when they shouldn't be paid below the minimum wage. And there are crackdowns on that and fines imposed on companies that do that. The majority of the people found to be below the minimum wage are in this gig economy and in care services. So there is an issue in terms of what you pay people. But despite the fact you pay them so they get paid so little per hour, even if they do to supplement their incomes and they therefore don't mind, the firms that provide this service and use these people are still losing money. So Uber, I don't know, has it changed? Is it making any money? It may be valued very, very highly, but actually it's losing money. So you wonder, when you look at the combination of these factors, relatively bad for the economy generally in terms of productivity, good for the consumer who can get things cheaply and so on, you begin to wonder whether it is a sustainable model and whether there is something else in the way in which we apply AI, the way in which firms are created, the types of services we give, which need to be rethought, or perhaps there's a revolution coming, which Microsoft can tell us a little bit more about. But while this is going on, there is no doubt that workers in the gig economy have considerably fewer rights than is the case for anyone who's employed full-time. Now, as I suggested, all the evidence of us says that people don't mind it. They like the flexibility. The reality is that I think it's only 1 in 10 who rely exclusively on the gig economy for their overall income. But those who do, the interesting thing is they need to do loads of different gig economy jobs to have a decent level of income. And that is exhausting. There's a lot of research that I saw from the Oxford Internet Institute which suggests that, in fact, it is over a long period debilitating, exhausting, and actually has all sorts of impacts on family life. What Matthew Taylor did, I mean, the interesting thing is, I think certainly we're quite right to say that very little has in fact been done. There have been some interesting cases with Uber, but also with delivery, which went the other way. So we'll talk about that in a second. But there was a report by Matthew Taylor, who of course was a Labour spad, really. He was running the strategy unit under Tony Blair. He's now head of the Royal Society of Arts and Manufacturing. He did this review to look at whether we're actually treating these people equitably and what needs to happen. And what he did find is that in a number of cases, because of the restrictions put on employees, or if you call them employees, on their workers, those people were actually much more proper employees than one thought originally. And that there had to be also a new look at the way in which the pay was contrasting with people in permanent employment, the way in which agency workers were employed, and tightening up very significantly the rights of those people, creating actually in his report a new class of worker who are, I think I've written this down, who are sort of not exactly full-time employees, but have a relationship which classifies them as still requiring, which I'm now trying desperately to remember what he called them, dependent contractors. That's it, dependent contractors, who should have a status which gives them the rights such as sick pay, and also tightens the rights of losing their jobs at the end of the day, and also allows them to work for more than one employer. Quite often there are restrictions imposed on who you can work for. If you're not working for that particular firm, that of course is no longer allowed actually in practice at present. So those proposals have hardly been implemented. There is a tightening that's going on in terms of the way the courts are looking at this. Matthew Taylor himself, who produced the report in, I think, 2017, was all over the papers again just a couple of months ago, saying that he would give the government only 4 out of 10 in what they have implemented. And it's interesting because it's not as if he's asked for anything particularly tough. The unions have all said he hasn't done enough. The TUC has said he hasn't done enough. But at least he has highlighted that the balance right now between worker and employer is unfavorable to the worker, needs to be changed. It's gone too far on the side of the employer. And the companies themselves said, we don't really want loads of extra legislation, which is more or less what you're suggesting, but their response was pretty mild. And given that it was a pretty mild report, which left lots of people disappointed, the fact that so little has been done despite it is a worry. So efforts by him and others, and whatever it is that is done here, to push that further, I think, is important, because until the puzzles that I mentioned before are resolved, then people who work in the gig economy will still find themselves disadvantaged compared to the rest.
Right. So, if you were listening, and I assume you were, that covers a huge range of issues. If you take the issue about trade union, Mike's come about trade union and different organising models, where does the state step in and take some responsibility for legislating? And given there's a report recently where people in America, people in the gig economy, are just as happy in terms of their money, their time, and their work satisfaction as people in full-time employment, and about 70% of them don't want to stop being gig economy. How can we be sure, if we legislate, that we will get it right and we won't make life more difficult. The Taylor report was saying good governance from companies. Well, if we wait for Sports Direct to bring good governance in, I think we'll be waiting quite a wee while, though I'm sure they'll be taking steps. If you take what Hugh said, Hugh basically said rip up education as it is at the moment. If you listen to that, he said we should be looking at creativity, empathy. We should be looking at
Critical thinking.
critical thinking.
Yeah.
This is not what we teach now. This is not what's currently on the national curriculum. And then he said on skills, continue teaching and helping people to... Well, that's a whole new skills offer that we are nowhere near. In fact, we've been ripping it up over many years. So where do we do that? So he's basically said, rethink your education and skills policies so that we're ready for the 21st century. Well, we're miles away from having those sort of discussions. The discussion on the productivity puzzle that Vicky raised, interestingly, as we do that, where's the productivity in the public sector? So care, a place where people are not being paid the minimum wage, who is responsible for care? We are in the public sector. And I think I would argue, we started something in Newham which said, I don't want to use your idea. I don't want to know how much time you spend. I want to know that you're doing a good job and that the person you're caring for is satisfied. So we need to rethink, I think, our approach to the public sector. So there's a wide variety of jobs, never mind discussing the impact AI will have, never mind all the other things you'd normally discuss. Huge variety of questions and comments. And I look to you now to provide those interesting questions and comments. So I'll take 3 at a time. And I would really like to see a gender balance here, guys. So come on, let's see if we can do that. I've got 3 men up at the moment, so come on. I would like a gender balance. I'll start here. Come on, help me. Thank you. 1 up there and 1 there. First 3 questions. Keep them brief, but interesting.
Thank you to the panel. That's a really interesting discussion. I've always had an interest in the gig economy. I used to work for a responsible business organisation called BITC, and we engaged with Uber, Deliveroo, a number of other gig economy organisations. I've always been interested in this debate, and I've heard a lot about exploitation in this market. And I thought I couldn't really have an interesting debate about this without having first-hand experience. So I signed up to Deliveroo recently. I applied to a job without giving any previous experience. I got the job within 2 weeks. They paid for all my equipment. I signed up for a Sunday, which admittedly is a busy shift. I got paid up to £30 per hour for the busier shift, which was pretty decent, probably actually more than my day rate, my hourly rate for my current job. And I could tap in and out of the job at any time I wanted. So, especially in an economy where we've got stagnant wages, and people need to top up their income, paying for their children or their education. I guess my question is, without those contractual obligations of someone tapping in and out of that, there's a huge value there. If you tap in at the right time, you can actually make some decent money. What is the issue with that?
Lady at the back. And thank you.
I kind of had 2 thoughts, really. The first one is that I don't necessarily buy that you need to, in order to have flexibility and freedom, you need to work within the gig economy. So I work for a women's organisation which has a feminist ethos, and as part of that, the organisation is respectful of the fact that you might have other things to do in your life, for example, childcare, and allows you to coordinate your hours accordingly. And I think that that's something which could be more widespread without necessarily compromising people's workers' rights. And then the second thing is, I think that there is a bit of a safeguarding issue with not having, with having workers from the gig economy turn up without proper checks. So, for example, your Uber driver, if you don't have any, if Uber hasn't checked that your Uber driver doesn't have, X, Y, or Z criminal convictions, you're put in a very dangerous situation. So I think that there's consumer protections as well, which are relevant in terms of gig economy, which I think need to be looked at.
Thank you. Gentleman there. Who was the person with the hand up at the back? You'll be next in the next round. Just
Hi.
giving you notice where we can take the microphone.
Hi, I'm from the Association of Independent Professionals and the Self-Employed. when Taylor was doing his review, we argued strongly to him that the real question was, what is the definition of self-employment rather than what is the definition of the gig economy? Because we believe that actually there are many people in the gig economy who are genuinely self-employed and who want to be self-employed, and therefore they should not be penalised as workers, as they would see it. They don't want the rights that are being proposed. I mean, obviously, there are then a group of people underneath that who do deserve the rights and who are exploited, but they are a vast minority. And I think the problem is, at the moment, the courts are deciding who are self-employed and who aren't self-employed, and really the policymakers have a duty to do that. And we've talked both to Labour and the government about this, and there's a great reluctance to move from this because they think it's too complex. But, I mean, we actually put a matrix to the government of how they could do this, and we await to hear back from them. But, I mean, do the panel think that we're right or wrong?
Well, with the way this government performs, I think we're waiting a long time, mate, to be honest, to get any response. I'll go the other way around now. Vicky.
Well, I think your point is very well made, that yes, you want some extra job. There are loads of people who are contractors out there, loads of people who have been self-employed, as we've been hearing, who are then asked to do something extra, and they do it from their kitchen or whatever it is. They do another review, they get paid. I mean, we all write things for which, you know, someone pays us something, and it's sometimes quite easy to do, sometimes quite difficult. The Deliveroo example is an interesting one because, of course, they were taken to court and the decision was that there was enough flexibility there and no real obligation, just as the way you described it. So it was perfectly justified that people should be self-employed under that particular definition. The Uber one was very different in the sense that they actually have an obligation. The people who work as drivers, whether they have tests or not, that's a very important point made by the lady at the back. But there is an obligation to that, at least it's 80% of whatever it is that they give you, you have to accept. There are penalties if you don't accept. And you've got to be around once you're online, that is, you've got to do that. So the judgment was that you're not actually self-employed, you are a proper employee, and therefore you need to have the rights of other employees. So I think it varies from case to case, and obviously whatever recommendations Matthew Taylor has made, in terms of them becoming proper regulation, need to be looked at from that point of view. But of course, what the draft legislation that came out in 2017 says, which hasn't actually yet gone through, is that it is down to the employer to prove that these people are either self-employed or not self-employed, and therefore they're employees. So what it does, at least, if it were to be enacted, it shifts the balance away from the individual worker having to prove it to the employer having to demonstrate it themselves. So that's what's going on. But of course, what you're saying in terms of the way you go in and out and supplement your income is fine. You're an able-bodied person. You can get on your bicycle and do the Deliveroo stuff. Loads of other people cannot do that. And if that is all that is available in the future, or at least a lot more of the way in which you can support your family, particularly very low wages, is what you can do, and you can't actually deliver that particular service because you just, haven't got the potential to do it that way, then that is quite restrictive for lots of other people. But it is absolutely true that the majority quite like it, but they don't necessarily, it doesn't mean that they like working just in those current conditions. They don't want anything that stops them from being able to log on and do the work. But if you ask them, would you like to have a little bit more sort of sick pay if you can't actually work, and some holiday, they would say yes, please, in those reviews. And somebody mentioned you talked about education and the creative sector and how we really need to encourage people there. I mean, one of the articles I was reading while researching this had the people from the creative sector saying that actually now that arts funding has been reduced, what they do is they're increasingly going for agency workers, those that don't have to pay any of the extra overheads they would have to pay in the sense of extra pay and conditions, and that they would have had to have paid if they had hired them properly. So those cuts that we are seeing in public funding, and the problems that the councils have and so on, are actually pushing more and more of that onto people who may still get the same pay per hour, so no real difference with minimum wage, even though in some cases there is, with the permanent wage, but they actually get a lot fewer of the benefits, and that cuts their costs. So it's not necessarily a very good environment to be in, because you don't collect over a period your, enough pension rights, etc., etc. So it should not just be discarded as a need to do something in this area, just because there are some people who can get on a bike and do some delivering on a Sunday.
Our questioner looked very happy when she talked about sick pay. So I definitely think that went down well there. Right. Sorry.
I mean, yeah, that case of Uber there, it's a case of a job is a job, really, isn't it? Look, and there are many people probably not as fortunate as yourself, really, where it might be their first job, the second job, and in many cases even the third job. There's been a record growth in employment, but it's quite fascinating when you demarcate there, you scratch beneath the surface, and it can be 0 hours contracts, part-time, fixed-term contracts, a huge growth indeed. The care sector is a great example there. Again, underpaid but vital for our communities, our families, and the economy. Yet increasingly, employed on short-term 0 hours contract basis. They are crying out for change, and I've spoke before about regulation's not a bad thing. In fact, fairness is something which is ingrained, I would hope, in the British psyche, and I think we need to, as I said before, put that referee back on the pitch and pay people a real living wage, give them proper terms and conditions, holidays, sickness pay. People are crying out for it. Other people want flexibility in terms of self-employment, genuine self-employment. My father was self-employed. I was brought up in that environment. He did particularly well out of what he did, really, and made sacrifices along the way. Worked long hours, but that kind of suited him and family circumstances. But it wasn't pseudo self-employment, as we see far too much of at the moment. I think I'd be interested, actually. You mentioned you've sent this matrix to government. I'd be interested in seeing that as well, actually, and hopefully you'll get a quicker. Well, never mind. Hopefully you will get a quicker response, certainly from me, and certainly the woman at the back there. You referred to, actually, genuine flexibility is a good thing for the brilliant work, undoubtedly, that you do, and you have some family and caring responsibilities as well. But there are some employers out there putting restrictions on that, like you say, where you must exclusively do one job in the gig economy and not work for other people as well. So it's something that we've got to recognise and respond to.
I think we also need to design for the future as well as the present. And I think there are responsible companies that offer levels of flexibility to their workforce, and increasing levels of flexibility, because that's what their workforce is demanding. And if they want to recruit good people, then they've got to respond to that demand. And it's those companies that are not responding and not offering that kind of flexibility that the companies, they won't be around in a decade's time. But we also need to build for the future gig economy. So to take, for example, you kind of disaggregate work because you've got some functions that are automated. You've got some functions that can be performed by human beings in a workplace. You've got some functions that could be performed by a human being anywhere in the world at any time. And that's where you could actually see the gig economy participating more directly in work. So take, for example, web design. You could commission from a gig economy platform a the creation of a new logo or a new function on your website or whatever it might be. Now that doesn't need to be in an office somewhere nearby. That could be the other side of the world. That could be a piece of work that's done overnight. That could almost be put out to almost an exchange with people, offering their services to provide, just the creation of a single logo. And that's again, we're talking about now. But if we're thinking about, well, what kind of jobs will be in the future, and what aspects of those jobs could be done anywhere by anyone, then you've got to make sure that economy and the workforce that's providing that work are sufficiently protected. And that's the risk. You mentioned companies that are taking on contractors because they don't want to offer the sort of rights that employees have. If workers had those rights irrespective of their employment status, then there wouldn't be an issue, and you wouldn't have that kind of that arbitrage between taking on an employee or putting it out to contractor. For the contractor, then they would still have those protections. And I think that's what we've got to think about, as well as throwing out the education system and redesigning it from scratch.
You said it, not me.
Well, no, I think it's quite interesting that we've got an education system that was designed for the first industrial revolution.
Yes.
In fact, probably before then, probably for bringing in the harvest, actually.
Yeah, that's right.
And actually, maybe we need to think about how we design an education system that is a little bit more future-proof for the fourth industrial revolution, which is now, and for the fifth industrial revolution, which is around the corner, being driven by quantum. Design an education system that can plan ahead for that, then that'd be very exciting. That is not what we have at the moment. In fact, we're taking steps further back from where we should be going, around getting human beings to do things that computers can do better, including rote learning.
Okay, I'll just make it aside and say, I don't know if people know that teenagers really don't wake up till 11 o'clock. So if you were designing an education system, you'd start at 11. That's entirely correct. So yeah, it is designed for the harvest. Right, 3 questions. I had one there, I have one there, and I have one, the lady just there. And then I think we'll have one, and I have 2 more. Can I just see who else was into it? Well, 1, 2 more. One final person. I'm going to have one more round. And that'll be the final one. So, right, off we go.
Hello.
So if you could follow that, you're better than I am, right?
Emre Çalışkan from the Foreign Policy Center. I was wondering, how can we ensure the competitive advantage of British market, especially London, among other gig economies, given the condition that living cost of London is so expensive. At the same time, we are facing the Brexit, and many this is a big challenge for the emerging startups. Most of the startups in high technologies are appearing in the emerging markets, or the startups actually established here are outsourcing their services to emerging countries. So how can we ensure this gap actually?
Right. Behind you. No, the lady there, standing up. Yeah.
Thank you. John Keynes said before he died that we'd be all working a 15-hour week by this time. I can't remember the exact year, but we would be working a 15-hour week. And it just feels like we're working more and more and more. We're giving all these technologies, and all that's happening is we're working more and more and more. And really, I think we should be bold and stop working less, because I don't want to be lying on my deathbed saying, I really enjoyed that PowerPoint that my colleague gave. I won't be doing that. I'll be wanting to spend more time with my family and things like that. And I think we should be bold about 4-day weeks and things like that. And something like, a national income, so that everybody gets that chance, because it actually works, because we have it in Finland and Canada, where people are actually given a wage to stop them being in poverty, but actually they become more creative, and it's been proven that their work, there's less stress levels, there's less people in prisons and things like that. And I think we should be being more bold about work and looking at it another way, like not getting us to work more, but getting us to work less.
Right, and the lady there, come forward a bit, come forward a bit. Oh, it doesn't matter. Yes, thank you.
Yeah, I just wanted to talk about how positive this kind of work can be for people with disabilities. I used to work full-time as a social worker. I acquired a couple of disabilities later in life, and I found it, as the most, having little bits of temporary work, most productive. What we don't have is a welfare system that can back up, so when you get ill again, you can return to that welfare system. Once you get over a ceiling, you're knocked back off it again, and to get back on it if you become ill. What I'd like to see is some kind of the system working together, particularly universal credit, people are going to be trapped on that. They're going to be scared to leave that if they are lucky enough to get the disabled premiums. They're going to be scared to leave that and to go into work. And it is such a, I think you made the point, it's such a way that, you know, the types of work that are available mean that, you know, people can make a positive contribution to not only the economy, but to to society as a person, you know, particularly someone who has a physical disability, who can, you know, is not able to access the community.
Thank you. Right, I'll come to Mike first. If we could keep things short so I can get the last three round of questions in so everybody will feel they've been part of it. Mike.
Yes, yeah, I'll start with the woman in the centre here first. Again, it's good to hear that, you know, that actually in terms of some flexibilities, part-time jobs and so forth, it's enabled you to work. But you're right, in terms of the welfare state at the moment, it should be there, it should be on your side, it should be there to support people, giving a hand up where necessary. And it's certainly not the case at the moment. If we look at universal credit, for example, it's a system now which is fundamentally flawed. The original principle was a good one, merging 6 benefits into one, and it was about helping people, seemingly, into employment when people were able to go into employment. And of course, you know, one of the designers of the system being Ian Duncan Smith, and it's rare I'll kind of quote this particular MP in an element of a positive light, but even he was critical of the finance that was taken out of the in-work element of universal credit. I was certainly interested, the woman delegate over there, around this notion of UBI, Universal Basic Income, and the cases there, the pilot in Finland, which I and others have followed quite closely. You've probably heard John McDonnell not very long ago talk about, you know, something we may kind of seriously look at, maybe as a pilot there. I remember studying some years ago, I think there was a text I read, it was called Towards a Leisured Society, you know, and this was way in the 90s. And at the time at this particular university, we had no internet, no mobile phones. Went to a reunion recently. And you're right, my life and our lives have become so much busier, almost kind of slaves to the technology rather than the other way around. Of course, the General Secretary of the TUC recently said it should be our aim to go towards a 4-day week, so kind of establishing that zeal in terms of the trade union movement. So I'd love to see you know, people actually being able to have more of a quality of life in terms of the family and the friends and so forth. I fear we may be a long way off. So, I didn't quite catch the gentleman's point. Sorry, is the glasses on over there?
No,
The competitiveness of London versus emerging markets.
Yes. Oh, yes. Okay. Yes. So, emerging markets globally, we're talking about here. Yes. Yes.
okay.
Okay,
I'll
we
come
can
to,
try and do that.
I'll come to you. I'll come to you.
Yes. Well, shall I start on that one? And Vicky, maybe
Yeah.
I think it's the question, isn't it? Really, you know, you look at what the UK offers gig economy workers compared with other markets, and actually it's quite difficult to see how the UK is going to be a really great place to grow future gig economy workers. I mean, you know, it's really hard. It is. So as a company, we look at the UK as one possible destination for global investment that could go anywhere. And we look at the UK and we look at all the other competitive markets as well. And the UK is you know, at the moment, unfortunately Brexit has kind of put a bit of a spanner in that, but is a favoured destination for investment for companies like ours. But only just, because it is incredibly expensive. It's very expensive for workers to, you know, transport everything. And actually, if you think about it, the conversation that we haven't had on this panel is about taxation, because actually a lot of what we are we're talking about in terms of how do we give workers more rights actually incurs more costs. And we're not having a conversation about taxation. We are used as an economy to US levels of taxation and kind of France levels of public service. And actually what we should be paying is France levels of taxation if we want France levels of service. And if we're going to want to pay US levels of tax, then we're going to have to cut back on the services we expect. And that's what also contributes to this incredible cost that the UK has versus other emerging markets. So I think if we don't tackle the tax issue about how do we treat, not only how do we tax the gig economy, but how do we also tax the entire economy in order to be able to provide levels of support for the gig economy, then I think we're kind of missing a trick.
I'm going to help you out. I think here people would support progressive taxes going up. Is that a problem with anybody here? No. Right, any Labour delegates, of course that's not a problem for us. We're tax and spenders, mate, right? Right, listen, I'm very sorry. I want to come to Vicky. Time is kind of running out. The people I promised could ask questions, I lied. I'm really sorry. So I'll ask Vicky to say something, to have a final comment as well, and then I will come back to both Mike and Hugh to have a quick final comment as well. I'm really sorry to the three of you. It's just time's run away with us.
Okay, nevertheless, I'll try and answer some.
No, please
some
answer them and
questions.
then give us a quick.
Okay, I mean, obviously, it's very helpful if people with disabilities are able to log on to the gig economy up to a point. The reality is that in terms of backup by government, given the cuts in funding, that's not going to be happening. So someone else is going to have to foot the bill somehow for all the extra things that are required. One is sick and needs support. So on current, certainly the way things are going at present with this particular government that we have, I think that is unlikely. So the onus will be back on the employers, which is what we're discussing. We were discussing earlier. I mean, the interesting thing about the whole area, though, even though people want to work for it, is the low pay that is there, which has helped firms keep their costs down. Because wages are low more generally in the economy, they haven't increased hardly above inflation. What is happening is that margins are very tight and people are using increasingly this type of labour to keep their costs down, and therefore what the consumer is prepared to pay, they can actually meet that demand. So that is another a serious problem. And if you're looking at self-employment, the interesting thing about the gig economy is that if you calculate both those 2.8 million who apparently are employed through the use of apps, and you add the self-employed, you're talking about 5 million people, possibly. I mean, the interesting thing is since the financial crisis, there's been an increase in self-employed people. Some of it is bogus self-employment, but anyway, there's been an increase in it. The worrying thing is that even though we all say it's great to be doing it, we all do that work. We know we write an article, we get whatever, 300 quid if we're very lucky, 50 if not. The amount of time it actually takes you to do it per hour, it actually costs you an awful lot more than that. Average earnings of the people in self-employment during that period fell by 22%. So we're deluding ourselves in thinking that this is actually solving a big problem. It may give you a little bit of the margin, but that's about it.
Any last comment you want to make?
I think actually it's a very exciting development. It's just that the way in which it is done, that probably needs to be rethought. I would not be against it. I think it's fantastic to be able to do that. I would love to see economic performance improve as a result of it. I haven't seen very much evidence of that. And I'm just looking to the tech guys to get there.
Okay, Hugh, you're going to solve the problems of the world?
Well, we're working on it, but so final comment. Look, some of these things can be fixed relatively quickly with enough motivation, but the thing that really takes the time is education. And you've got kids who go into primary school now, and that's where we need to start the intervention, because we've got 10 years before they're a part of the economy. And so I would urge, of those 5 points that I made earlier, that we really, really start now on education.
Mm-hmm.
Mike.
Finally, I mean, in terms of the 5 points, actually, I mean, I agree with every one of those. And in particular around education and early years, and radically transforming the curriculum. To ensure that people develop and thrive and reach their full potential in the future, and that will certainly drive economic growth. I mean, it's a reality. It's with us. do we fight against it, or do we embrace and shape it? And I think there's been a consensus in terms of the panel there that actually, you know, we require greater regulation, greater intervention from governments, from industry, indeed from trade unions as well. So there's that consensus. So, you know, moving forward, I would be an optimist, but it's up to people in this room and beyond to drive things forward. Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much. I am going to just make a wee, just picking up those comments to make two comments. The only place in this country where if you're disadvantaged, you start school at the same level as somebody who's advantaged, the only place in the country where that is true is Newham. The only place in the country where every child is taught to play a musical instrument for free is Newham. I only offer you that as a wee advert. If you're thinking of moving, please do feel free. Can I thank the speaker? Can we thank the speakers, please? I think it's been really interesting. Thank you very much. Thank you. Best audience of the week. Thank you.